Welcome to the Restricted Handling Podcast. This is what's been going on in China in the past 24 hours. On the diplomatic front, the big update is that UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer's visit to Beijing has now moved from symbolism into substance. Yesterday, the story was about the optics. First British Prime Minister in China in 8 years, warm language, no choosing between China and the US. Today, we have clearer signals on what both sides are actually prioritizing. Starmer met Xi Jinping for more than an hour at the Great Hall of the People, followed by extended discussions and a formal lunch. He brought a delegation of more than 50 business and cultural leaders, and the focus was unapologetically transactional. The UK side is talking about progress on reducing Chinese tariffs on British whiskey, potential visa-free travel for British passport holders, and a new law enforcement cooperation track focused on irregular migration. That last piece is worth pausing on. British officials pointed out that more than 60% of engines recovered from small boats crossing the channel are Chinese manufactured. The agreement being finalized is about information sharing and disrupting those supply chains at the source. This isn't values-based cooperation. This is problem solving where incentives line up, and Beijing is comfortable there. What hasn't changed, and was quietly reinforced today, is the trust gap. UK officials continued to use burner phones and temporary email accounts throughout the visit. Engagement and suspicion are running in parallel, not in sequence. That's the reality of the relationship now. Human rights were raised again, but there's no movement to report. Starmer confirmed he brought up Xinjiang and the case of Jimmy Lai. Xi did not engage publicly on either. At roughly the same time, the U.S. asylum decision for Guan Heng, the Chinese national who filmed detention facilities in Xinjiang, landed in Washington. The ruling cited retaliation against his family and credible evidence of armed guards and lethal enforcement. That contrast is still there. Diplomacy on one track, legal and moral confrontation on another. While Xi was hosting Western leaders, Beijing was also sending a very different message inside China. Earlier this week, authorities carried out the execution of 11 members of the Ming family, a Chinese criminal clan tied to large-scale online scam operations run out of Laokai, Myanmar. This is an update from a story we flagged before, but the finality matters. Appeals were rejected, confessions were aired. The message was unmistakable. These operations generated more than 10 billion yuan over several years and involved kidnapping, forced labor, torture, the whole grim package. The backdrop hasn't changed. China became fed up with Myanmar's military for tolerating scam compounds, quietly backed ethnic militias that seized Laokai in late 2023, and took custody of the ringleaders. The scams themselves haven't vanished, they've shifted geographically, but Beijing wanted a public punctuation mark. This was it. That emphasis on discipline leads directly back to the PLA, where the leadership purge continues to cast a long shadow. We're not learning new names today. That story is already established. But we're getting a clearer sense of how Beijing is framing it internally. State media has moved beyond corruption language. The accusations against Zhang Youxia and Liu Zhenli emphasize undermining the CMC chairman responsibility system and harming combat effectiveness. That's not bookkeeping, that's command and control. It suggests dissatisfaction with execution, readiness, or compliance at the top of the military. The timing still matters. This is January, when the PLA launches its annual training cycle and begins implementing the next phase of its modernization plans. If there were disputes over pace, priorities, or acceptable risk, this is exactly when they would surface, and exactly when Xi would shut them down. The Central Military Commission is now effectively Xi plus the discipline apparatus. That's unprecedented in modern Chinese military history. What hasn't changed, and this is important, is that external military pressure has not eased. Around Taiwan, the pattern we described yesterday is holding. No dramatic spikes, no surprise maneuvers, just persistent presence. PLA aircraft continue operating near and across the median line, and planned vessels remain active around the island. Taiwan's response this week reinforces a trend we've been tracking. The drills in Kaohsiung weren't ceremonial. They integrated attack drones, fast missile boats, mobile anti-ship missile launchers, and snipers to build a near-shore kill chain. Earlier in the week, Taiwan demonstrated HIMARS strikes aimed at the Penghu Islands if Chinese forces were to seize them first. President Lai Ching-te's emphasis remains the same: fewer set-piece displays, more combat-oriented training. Quiet competence over theater. Japan also stays in the frame, though today's update is more about continuity than escalation. Japanese forces tracked another Chinese naval group transiting the Miyako Strait into the Philippine Sea: 2 destroyers, a frigate, and a replenishment ship. This was the second such transit in a week. These aren't headline-grabbing events anymore, and that's the point. This is normalization in action. On the cyber side, there's a subtle but notable development. Researchers observed a short-term dip in high-initiative Chinese cyber operations following the military arrests. That pause appears to be linked to command uncertainty inside the Joint Staff Department, which plays a key role in approving intelligence priorities. But this is not a retreat. Chinese actors continue exploiting edge vulnerabilities, using malware-free techniques, and maintaining access to critical infrastructure networks overseas. Think of it less as silence and more as a brief inhale. Economically, the divergence we talked about yesterday is sharpening. Externally, China's export machine keeps running hot. Internally, the strain is visible. Ningbo remains a useful case study. The port is still moving massive volumes: cars, appliances, industrial goods, supporting a record trade surplus. But inland, housing prices are down sharply, consumer spending is weak, and municipal governments are cutting back. Fixed asset investment in Ningbo fell more than 20% last year. Nationally, more provinces have lowered their growth targets for 2026, including manufacturing heavyweights. This isn't panic, but it is acknowledgement. Beijing appears willing to accept slower growth as long as industrial output and exports carry the headline numbers. Domestic demand remains the weak link. On advanced technology, the story continues to evolve incrementally. NVIDIA's CEO said China is still finalizing approval for imports of the H200 AI chip. Conditional approvals have reportedly been granted to major Chinese firms, but with restrictions that slow actual orders. This looks less like a philosophical shift and more like gap filling, buying time while domestic alternatives mature. Meanwhile, China announced plans to build space-based AI data centers, solar-powered computing infrastructure in orbit over the next 5 years. It's ambitious, expensive, and very on-brand. Big vision, long timelines, and a heavy emphasis on technological sovereignty. History reminds us that systems under internal stress often double down on grand projects. This fits the pattern. When you step back, today's update doesn't contradict what we discussed previously, it reinforces it. China is projecting stability abroad while tightening discipline at home. It's courting middle powers without fully reassuring them. It's purging senior military leaders while keeping pressure steady around Taiwan and Japan. And it's leaning hard on exports and technology as buffers against domestic economic strain. Thanks for listening and being part of the RH community. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review. If you want to see some changes, email us at info@restrictedhandling.com. We also publish a daily written intel brief on Substack, where you'll find even deeper coverage of Russia and China, along with insights on Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK.